Here we are at the Castro Theatre in San Francisco for a quadruple feature of Vigilante, Raw Force, Escape from New York, and Lady Terminator. The festivities are about to begin.
So we have a special co-presentation. The concept of this specific event was in fact brought to me by a theater in Austin, Texas named the Alamo Drafthouse. Has anybody been to this theater? And so for years, this theater has been programming every single night the craziest double features you could ever dream of. And they've decided to take it on the road and to come to special programs at least across the West Coast. And so Zack Carlson specifically has been an old friend. Has anybody used to go to All Freakin' Night in Olympia? Did anybody do this crazy thing? Literally, he would start this thing like at 7 p.m., am I right, Zack?
Midnight.
Started at midnight and it would just go all night long. But so, this theme tonight of fighting back is taken from, a series of films that range from the movie you're about to see, Vigilante. Woo! And then, after Vigilante is a movie called Raw Force. These movies are really obscure, and this is really exciting to be able to see these in 35 millimeter, and I think we should give it up for this beautiful Castro Theatre right now.
Anyhow, this show for us is very meaningful. I know I love this movie Vigilante, maybe not as much as Zack, because Zack is Vigilante fan #1. And he talks about this movie literally every day of his life.
Exclusively.
It gets a little tiresome, but after we watch this movie, maybe we won't talk about it for about 3 days.
I'm obsessed with vigilantism as an art, not just in films, but in life. Charles Bronson was the king of it. I'm not going to ever dispute that. He is #1. But of all of the Death Wish knockoffs, I think Vigilante is the very finest, and that is saying a hell of a lot. This movie really shows you how to right wrongs in your own home. We both love the movie, but it was made by a guy named William Lustig. Some of you guys might be familiar with the Maniacs cop trilogy. So, do you want to throw some?
Yeah, I'm really... Bill Lustig had created, he was like the #1, he was the good guy at Anchor Bay when Anchor Bay was really, really good. And then he branched off and created Blue Underground DVD, which is the best DVD label that's ever existed. And I always kind of thought of him as like, hey, it's this guy who does DVD stuff, and he kind of made some movies. His movies are good, but really recently watching this, with really close attention, it occurred to me that he's really kind of like the Sam Fuller of the 80s and early 90s, and the stuff he did is really, really way better than it had to be to draw audiences, and I think this is a really strong film. There's some great performances. Fred Williamson in particular is better in this than he's ever been in anything else, I think.
You guys, anybody like Fred Williamson, the Hammer? Fred Williamson? But it's true, Robert Forster, who Jesse is a true fan of for a very good reason. He, in this movie, I want to point out, he does a certain line. He has one line reading that is, in my humble opinion, the finest line reading in any film ever made by anybody, and that is not hyperbole, it's true. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there's a scene in the film, first half hour, where he's packing up some Tupperware, and he lays it out. He says a sentence when he's packing that Tupperware, and you will know it when you hear it, and to me, that is the apex of filmmaking and acting right there. No joke.
It's like that's what the art of film had been building to all those years.
And then one more story, as we're talking about Lustig and we're talking about Vigilante. William Lustig got hooked on using the same lead stunt driver, because almost all of his movies had some kind of rampaging car chase, especially Maniac Cop 2. But in this film, there's some wild stunt driving, and he had to use the same guy. Unfortunately, the character that the stunt driver was doubling for was a black guy, and that stunt driver was white, so that caused an unfortunate problem. But William Lustig decided just to put his white friend in blackface for the duration of shooting those scenes. That's already a questionable decision, especially when you're shooting in Harlem. So, there were 2 days where this guy's hanging out on set in blackface, under the worst overpass in Harlem. Eventually somebody showed up and they said, an official person came out and said, you can't do this, you cannot have this happen. And he's like, gee, why not? But because of, of course, the guilds and all these different unions. They said, you need to have a black stunt driver playing a black role. And he's like, oh, okay. So they got a guy out who was the only black stunt driver on the East Coast, and he went over the little jump wrong, and the cameraman fell out and ended up in traction in the hospital. He's in the car with the camera, and suddenly the cameraman was going like 80 miles an hour on his neck. So William Lustig said on the set, he yelled, "Back to blackface," and fired the guy on the set. So a very, if you don't mind me using the term, roguish story of the production of Vigilante, and really kind of an indication of of these guys were just doing this stuff with absolutely no rules and no regard for what was going on. It's just a pretty violent, hateful, angry movie, and beautiful for it.
And if we've given it up for a lot of things in the last 5 minutes, but we could just give it up for hatred and violence.
All right, thanks again, Jesse. Thank you, Castro, and thanks you guys for coming. And we're about to watch 4 true major ragers.
Give it up, you guys, for these guys, Zack and Lars. Now, one last thing that the movie is really special for me about is the soundtrack. That specifically, does anybody know who did the soundtrack for this movie, not including these 2 guys here? Jay Chataway, come on up, beautiful. Jay Chataway did the soundtrack. Come on, that's a hard fucking trivia question. So for getting that right, Jay Chataway did a lot of soundtracks for movies like maybe Red Scorpion with Dolph Lundgren, maybe Invasion USA. Dark Age, very nice. What about Silver Bullet? So specifically what's sad is that the soundtrack is not available, so this is going to be a beautiful chance for you to listen to it in the theater. But what was available, what I was able to track down, is the salsa music that is used in this film. Willie Colon does the music for this, and it's really, really spectacular. So here's a soundtrack for Vigilante right there. Give it up. You guys, you gotta pace yourself. This is gonna be 8 fucking hours. And we're gonna kick it off with 3 super amazing trailers.